You didn't grow up careless. You grew up careful. Careful with your words, careful with your tone, careful with other people's moods. You learned to think ahead. Not because you were gifted, but because being unprepared felt dangerous. You noticed things other kids didn't. A sigh that meant trouble. A silence that meant something was wrong. A shift in energy that meant you should stay small. And people called you sensitive, mature for your age, an old soul. But what they didn't see was the cost. Because here is the paradox. The anxiety that once protected you is now the very thing exhausting you. What once kept you safe now keeps you restless. Your mind rarely goes quiet. Your body rarely relaxes. Even in calm moments, something in you waits for impact. Not because you expect disaster, but because peace feels unfamiliar. And when safety isn't familiar, the nervous system doesn't trust it. To understand the anxious child, we must stop seeing anxiety as a flaw and start seeing it as an adaptation. Anxiety is not random fear. It is anticipatory intelligence developed in unsafe emotional environments. Let's ground this in psychology. First, hypervigilance. Hypervigilance is a trauma response where the nervous system stays on high alert. For a child, this often develops in homes where emotions were unpredictable. Conflict appeared. Suddenly, caregivers were inconsistent or overwhelmed. The child learns, if I stay alert, I can prevent harm. The amygdala becomes overactive. The stress response activates faster than conscious thought. The body learns fear before language. Second, parentification. Many anxious children are emotionally parentified. They become the emotional regulator, the peacemaker, the one who senses problems before adults do this role. Reversal teaches the child that rest is irresponsible, relaxation is dangerous, vigilance equals love. Third, the default mode network. Neurologically, the brain's default mode network, responsible for self-reflection and imagination, becomes hijacked by worry. Instead of curiosity, it loops. What if? Did I do something wrong? What's coming next? Anxiety becomes the background noise of consciousness, not because the child is weak, but because their brain learned to survive. The deepest cost of growing up anxious is not fear. It is the loss of ease. You traded spontaneity for control, presence for preparation, authenticity for acceptability. You learned to be who the moment required rather than who you were. Carl Jung wrote that anxiety arises when the soul is divided against itself, when instinct is suppressed in favor of adaptation. And anxious children adapt beautifully. Too beautifully. They become reliable, responsible, emotionally intelligent. But inside there is a quiet grief. A grief for the child who never got to be careless. For the nervous system that never learned rest. For the self that learned love was conditional on performance. Seneca warned that anxiety comes from living in the future. Rilke wrote that patience with uncertainty is the deepest courage. But anxious children were never taught patience, only preparedness. So adulthood becomes a constant rehearsal for disasters that may never arrive. Anxious children do not outgrow anxiety. They refine it. They become adults who function well, but feel constantly on edge. You might recognize these patterns. 1. Relationships. You overthink texts. You fear being too much. You stay alert for signs of abandonment. You confuse anxiety with intuition. 2. Career. You overprepare. You fear mistakes more than failure. Rest feels unearned. Success doesn't calm you. It raises the stakes. 3. Self-worth. Your value feels conditional. You are only as safe as you are useful. Stillness triggers guilt. 4. Boundaries. You struggle to say no. Disappointing others feels dangerous. 5. Emotional regulation. You live in your head. Your body holds tension. You don't notice until exhaustion forces awareness. 6. Identity. You know who others need you to be, but struggle to know what you want. These are not character flaws. They are survival strategies that overstayed their welcome. Unlearning does not mean becoming careless. It means becoming safe inside yourself. Healing anxiety is not about eliminating fear. It is about teaching the nervous system safety. This begins gently. Inner child work. Not by revisiting trauma endlessly, but by offering reassurance consistently. You don't have to monitor everything. You are allowed to rest. Shadow work, reclaiming the part of you that learned to relax, the part that wanted to trust. Nervous system regulation. Safety must be felt, not understood. Breath, grounding, slowness. These teach the body what the mind already knows. And above all, softness over survival. As philosopher Alan Watts said, the more a thing tends to be permanent, the more it tends to be lifeless. You were never meant to live braced forever. You were shaped by uncertainty, but you are not owned by it. The goal is not to be fixed, but to become whole. There is a moment, usually quiet, usually alone, when you realize how tired you are. Not physically, not mentally, but existentially. Tired of anticipating, tired of rehearsing, tired of carrying a future that hasn't happened yet. And what hurts most is this realization. You don't remember choosing this. Anxiety didn't arrive as fear. It arrived as responsibility. The anxious child's secret belief. Every anxious child carries a belief they rarely speak aloud. If something goes wrong, it will be my fault for not seeing it coming. This belief doesn't come from logic. It comes from early emotional environments where unpredictability was normal, when adults were overwhelmed, when moods changed without explanation, when safety depended on awareness. So you learned to watch everything. Tone, timing, tension. Your nervous system became a radar, and radars don't rest. Why calm feels unsafe. Here is something few people talk about. For the anxious nervous system, calm can feel threatening, not because you enjoy chaos, but because calm was never stable long enough to trust. When peace arrived in childhood, it was often temporary. So your body learned to ask, how long will this last? That's why you feel uneasy during quiet moments. That's why joy carries an undertone of dread. That's why happiness sometimes feels fragile. Your body is still living in anticipation mode. The cost of always being ready. Readiness has a price. You struggle to be present. You struggle to enjoy without scanning. You struggle to receive without preparing for loss. Even love becomes something you monitor. You watch for changes. You listen for distance. You feel responsible for emotional stability. And slowly, subtly, anxiety replaces intimacy. Not because you don't want closeness, but because closeness without control feels dangerous. Anxiety and the fear of rest. For many anxious adults, rest feels undeserved. Stillness feels wrong. Slowness feels risky. Ease feels like negligence. Because as a child, vigilance kept you connected. You were praised for being good, for being easy, for not adding stress. So now, when you try to relax, your body asks, who's watching for danger? And if no one is, you do it yourself. The grief beneath the anxiety. Anxiety is loud, but beneath it is something quieter. Grief. Grief for a childhood without safety. Grief for a nervous system that never learned trust. Grief for the version of you that might have existed if calm had been reliable. This grief often goes unacknowledged because anxiety looks functional. You succeed, you manage, you cope. But coping is not living, and surviving is not the same as being safe. Relearning safety without losing strength. Here is the truth. Anxiety doesn't want you to hear. You don't need to dismantle your awareness. You need to soften it. Your intelligence stays. Your perception stays. Your depth stays. What leaves is the constant pressure to predict pain. Healing does not mean becoming careless. It means becoming rooted, grounded in the present, anchored in the body, oriented toward now instead of next. Teaching the body what the mind knows. Your mind may already understand, I'm safe. But the body doesn't learn through insight. It learns through repetition, through breath, through rest without consequence, through moments where nothing bad happens, and you let yourself notice. This is nervous system repair. Slow, unimpressive, revolutionary, choosing presence over protection. There will be moments where you feel the old urge rise, to prepare, to worry, to brace. That doesn't mean you failed. It means your body remembers, and you can respond with compassion instead of control. You can say, thank you for trying to protect me, but I'm here now. Final integration. You grew up anxious because someone had to be aware, and that someone was you. But you are not that child anymore. You are allowed to rest, allowed to feel joy without guarding it, allowed to exist without monitoring the future. Anxiety shaped you, but it does not own you. The goal is not to be fearless. The goal is not to be fixed. The goal is to become whole. There is something almost tragic about how competent you became. You learned to function in chaos, to think clearly under pressure, to anticipate what others missed, and the world rewarded you for it. But competence can become a cage when it replaces safety. Because no one ever asked what it cost you to become this way. Anxiety as a form of loyalty. Many anxious children remain anxious adults because anxiety became a form of loyalty. You stayed alert for your family. You stayed aware for the system. You stayed responsible for what others could not hold. Letting go of anxiety can feel like betrayal, as if relaxing means abandoning the role that once kept everything together. So your nervous system resists peace, not because it wants suffering, but because it equates vigilance with belonging. Why you feel guilty when things go well. Have you noticed this? When life begins to settle, when things finally feel stable, something inside you tightens. A voice whispers, "Don't get comfortable." This is not pessimism, it is conditioning. Your body learned that good moments were temporary, that safety was fragile, that ease preceded disruption. So joy becomes something you supervise, and supervision drains joy of its nourishment. The difference between awareness and anxiety. Awareness is grounded, anxiety is urgent. Awareness observes, anxiety reacts. As a child, you didn't have the luxury of awareness. You needed urgency. But adulthood offers a different choice. You can notice without bracing. You can feel without forecasting. You can respond instead of anticipate. This is not passive living. This is regulated living, letting the body catch up to the present. One of the hardest truths for anxious adults to accept is this. Your life may already be safer than your nervous system believes. The body is still living in an older chapter. So healing becomes an act of updating, not correcting. Each time you pause and nothing bad happens, the nervous system learns. Each time you rest and the world doesn't collapse, the body recalibrates. This is how trust is rebuilt. Not through force, but through evidence. The courage to be unprepared. Anxious children were never allowed to be unprepared. Someone had to be ready. Someone had to know. Someone had to stay alert. But adulthood allows a radical experiment. What if you didn't anticipate everything? What if you trusted your ability to respond instead of your need to predict? This is not recklessness. This is confidence in yourself. You are allowed to live in real time. Anxiety pulls you into tomorrow. Healing returns you to now. Now is where your breath is. Now is where your body is. Now is where safety can actually be felt. And presence, true presence, is the opposite of fear. Closing reflection. You grew up anxious because the world asked too much awareness of you too early. You adapted. You survived. You carried more than your share. But survival is not the finish line. Peace is. And peace is not something you earn by predicting pain. It is something you allow by trusting yourself. You were never weak for being anxious. You were intelligent in an unsafe environment. And now you are allowed to be something else. Calm. Grounded. Here. The goal is not to be fixed, but to become whole. If this helped you understand yourself with more compassion, share it with someone who lives in constant anticipation. Like, subscribe, stay. Your nervous system is learning a new story now.